Alright, this video is for the STAAR review. I'm just looking at the same packet we looked at in class. I'll hit a few things where I told you to write some more information along the side. So definitely look over this, read chapters 1 through 4, especially chapter 4. That's the foundation for the rest of the class, everything else we covered. So looking at the front page of this handout, obviously your 7 forms of government, make sure you can give examples of countries as far as what type of government they have and how it influences their culture. Factors that affect climate, know all of those. Your settlements, where people settle and why, like why do we settle along rivers and near oceans and in plains and things like that. And know your push and pull factors that can encourage people to leave one country or go to another. Your religions, know where they started, so Judaism, Christianity in Israel, the area of Israel, Islam in Saudi Arabia, and then Hinduism and Buddhism began in India, whereas in Buddhism spread though up to China and Japan, and Hinduism mainly stayed in India. Your economic development levels, so I'm just going down around the bottom. It pretty much just tells you like how you know where a country is based on looking at certain data. So obviously if they have a high infant mortality rate, low literacy rates, things like that, then it's going to be a poor country, mainly agriculture based. Your newly industrialized nations are a blend, so they're a mix, but more people are moving to the cities, more industrialized, less agriculture. Then your more developed countries like us, low infant mortality rate, high life expectancy, high literacy rates, things of that sort. Economic spectrum, mixed/socialist. Those are governments that you may have private ownership of businesses at the small level, so you may own your own little shop or something like that, but your bigger businesses are going to be owned by the government. It's basically just programs provided by the government, and a lot of your social needs such as health care, Social Security, welfare, things like that, are taken care of by the state, so you're heavily taxed for those socialist programs. And then command/communist, that's where the government maintains control over everything, so they own all the land, they own all businesses, so there's no private property and there's no private business whatsoever, and the government plans the economy. And capitalist or free enterprise or free market, know that those 3 terms are interchangeable. That's what we have, so it's supply and demand. Your culture words, obviously globalization, no examples of that, such as like blue jeans and stuff like that, where something that started here has spread throughout the world. And cultural convergence and divergence. Convergence meaning that cultures are becoming more alike, and blending, and divergence is that they're separating from each other. Like the dialect of English we speak compared to the dialect they speak in Great Britain are 2 different things. Levels of economic activity, make sure you know the primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary, and examples from each of those levels, like what is going on at each one of those levels. And your small scale and large scale production for goods, subsistence agriculture versus commercial agriculture, what's the difference between those two, and cottage industry versus your commercial industry. So subsistence agriculture and cottage industry is going to be in your poorer country where they're more focused on agricultural goods, and of course they're just farming for themselves so they can survive, and they're only making things they need like clothing. Whereas in your large-scale commercial agriculture, commercial industry, that's occurring in places like the United States, where you have large industry and we don't make our own things, we all go out and buy it. Data and graphs, make sure you can understand a population pyramid and interpret those. If you have any problems with those, look in chapter 4 in the section that talks about population. Climography, make sure you know the difference between climate and weather. Climate is the weather pattern in an area over a long period of time, so averages, like average high, low, precipitation, things like that for a particular month or time period, and weather is the conditions at that particular time in a particular place. We already looked at economic analysis. GIS, Geographic Information Systems, that's in chapter 1. That's basically like Google, where you have many different levels that you can add to the map and be able to see whatever information is that you're wanting to see. And then globalization and trade agreements. Make sure you know what tariffs are. Tariffs are taxes that are put on imported goods, and so usually whenever you have some kind of trade agreement like NAFTA or the EU or the Jakarta Triangle in East Asia, they're going to drop tariffs, so that way you have more free trade and it brings up the economies. of everybody in the region. So for NAFTA, mainly focusing on Mexico, and the EU, mainly some countries in Eastern Europe and Southern Europe like Italy, Greece, and Spain. And then Dakota Triangle would help like Taiwan and South Korea become as powerful as Japan. All right, next page looks at different maps and charts and things like that. We went over that, so know what happens at divergent, convergent, transform boundaries when it comes to earthquakes and plate tectonics, and what kind of landforms would form in each one. Also know your zones of latitude, your polar regions, your mid-latitude regions, and the type of weather that you see there. And then your tropics, between the Tropic of Capricorn and Cancer, with the equator running in the middle. And of course, there you don't have 4 seasons; you only have 2. The wet and dry season. That's where most of the rainforests are. And again, know how to look at these charts down here at the bottom, looking at like per capita GNI, percent of natural increase, infant mortality rates, life expectancy, urban population, your labor force by occupation, GDP by sector, literacy rates, and all that, and be able to look at all that data and figure out which country is the most powerful based on the data. Remember where it has the A and the I and the S, as you may see that on the test. If you can, right there. A is agriculture, I is industry, and S is service. And remember, your more powerful countries, richer countries, have more people in the service industry compared to the other 2 sectors. So that's one of your key components to look at. And then moving on, see how long I've gone. Wow, I'm really cramming it in. Okay. Your types of regions. You got cultural regions, formal regions, functional regions, and perceptual regions. The cultural regions are basically the areas of the world we talked about, like the Middle East, Latin America, Africa, and all that. And you look at the things they have in common, such as the type of governments they have, their languages they speak. So Middle East, for example, you have some theocracies and dictatorships in the region. They're mainly Muslim, and they speak Arabic for the most part. So they all have certain characteristics in common. Your formal regions are things like Texas or United States or whatever. It has formal boundaries that are recognizable. Functional regions. Functional region is basically, it has a node of activity, and the further away you get from that node of activity, you have distance decay occurs as you move away from that node. The 2 examples I gave are a radio station or like I-35. Like I-35 is the main superhighway for NAFTA. And so along I-35 near it, you'll have businesses and things like that and factories that are there partaking in NAFTA for trade between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. As you move further away from I-35, you're going to see less businesses and less factories and things like that that are built in connection with the trade occurring on I-35, because if you're farther away from I-35, basically why would you even build that way? Because you're not near what is going on. The whole purpose why you even have it built there. And then like a radio station, as you drive further away from the DFW area, the radio stations that transmit from this area begin to decay and fall apart because you're moving further and further away from that node of activity that's occurring in the DFW area. And then perceptual regions, that's based on people's feelings about an area. And so these are things like the Deep South or the Midwest or things of that sort, just what we consider to be a certain area. So like the South has certain characteristics that most people give it, like we talk slower, or we say certain things like y'all, or we all go to church, or whatever. Just certain things that, or we all drink iced tea and we all eat fried chicken. I don't know. There's a lot of them. But, and so that's perceptual. Some people divide it up in different ways. And then the next part looks at your world cultural regions: Middle East, Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, North America, Europe, China, Russia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Australia, and just know your main characteristics by each one of those. And then looking back at the religions again, Hinduism, they believe in reincarnation. Karma is the good and bad deeds that follow you and dictate where you end up on the caste system. Remember the caste system, you cannot move up and down in your current life. You have to die and be reincarnated to achieve a different caste. And that's mainly India. Buddhism is mainly in China, started by Siddhartha Gautama, also known as Buddha. He believed everything in life was suffering and sorrow, and the only way to achieve really happiness is to get rid of all suffering and sorrow, and you did that by following the Eightfold Path. And so that's to resist your need or want for things that you don't have, but be content with what you do have so you can achieve full happiness. They do believe in reincarnation. They don't, there's not a certain God they worship. And they believe once you reach perfect, or basically perfection, or enlightenment, is known as nirvana. So once you reach nirvana, you're never reincarnated again. You are at one with the universe at that point. Judaism, first monotheistic religion, believes in one God. They read what Christians refer to as the Old Testament, also known as the Torah. Make sure you know Torah. And then Christianity is a Jewish religion, obviously begun by Jesus. Christians believe Jesus was the Son of God, that he lived a perfect life, died, and rose again. And Christians believe that faith in Christ will get you to heaven. And as far as the different groups, you got Catholics and Protestants and Eastern Orthodox. Catholics are mainly Southern Europe, Latin America, and large parts of Southeast Asia. And then Protestants are in United States, Canada, and Europe. And Eastern Orthodox is Greece, and then on over like Turkey, and then Russia. Islam started by Muhammad. They believe in one God as well, Allah. Of course, that's just how you say God in Arabic. Quran is their main holy book, and they have the 5 pillars of Islam is what they follow. So faith, prayer, alms, fasting, pilgrimage. Faith that Muhammad and God will save them, basically. Not Muhammad will save them, but God will. And they pray 5 times a day facing Mecca. They give to the poor, obviously, to those in need. They fast during the month of Ramadan, fast during the day, and then eat at night. And then pilgrimage to Mecca. That pilgrimage is also known as the Hajj, the trip to Mecca. And then there's those paragraphs just kind of going over each of the different regions. For Australia and Oceania, really quick, the stuff we talked about yesterday, that I had you write down some of the extra stuff. We talked about, I think, Australia, we talked about how it was a penal colony and how the British colonized Australia mainly to put their prisoners there. So it was like Survivor Island for prisoners. And then the Aborigines were originally in Australia, but the British did not treat them well. Biggest reason is that the Aborigines were hunter-gatherers and did not use their land, and therefore the British didn't see them as having a claim to their land. We also talked about the lost generation, which is when the British took children, Aboriginal children, and forced them into schools with all white kids and families, all white families, and took them away from their original family, basically to make them forget they were ever an Aborigine, to force them to adopt white culture, and get rid of their native history and past. So that's the stolen generation. And then we talked about New Zealand with the Maori tribe. Maori tribe were the locals there. The British also took over New Zealand, but they treated the Maoris differently because the Maoris were farming, and therefore the British saw them as having a claim to the land compared to the Aborigines in Australia, which were hunter-gatherers, and therefore to them didn't have a claim to the land. So the Maori got treated a little bit better in New Zealand, but that became a colony as well. And that was really the last area to be colonized there in the South Pacific. That was the last area on Earth that hadn't been touched by Europeans when they took it. And then Antarctica, there's penguins. Other than that, that should be about it. So that was a mouthful for me. So again, look over chapters 1 through 4, especially chapter 4, and then pretty much all the highlighted things out of the first 3 chapters. The other real big important thing out of the first 3 chapters, in chapter 1, actually the first section, is the 5 themes of geography. You have to know the 5 themes of geography. So know all 5 of them. Be able to give examples for each one. We went over them over and over and over again, so make sure you got those down. Feel free to look through all the notes. So read in the first 4 chapters, look through all the notes, look through that packet, watch this video, and you should do okay. And I'll see y'all sometime next week. Remember, our unit test will be next Thursday.